150 years ago, Union soldiers breached the Confederate line in the last half hour. You have been precisely on the measure of their time. You went across the works this morning at exactly the time they went across the works. As the fighting swirled around the east angle, around the apex of this Confederate Mule Shoe salient, this part of the Confederate line was largely oblivious to that breakthrough. To look back from whence you came, it would have been impossible to see the rest of the Confederate line. You could hear it, you could sense it, but you could not take a measure of it. Where we are located, you have just walked along the line of the Louisiana brigade. Colonel William Monahan's brigade. Used to be Harry Hayes's troops. But Hayes was felled by a sharpshooter in the erection of these works. And now Monahan's men were located in those bottles. For Monahan's fellows, one Confederate said that they were startled by the sound like the roaring of a tempestuous sea that came over those earthworks. And one of those Louisiana soldiers shouted out the direful warning, "Look out, boys, we will have blood for supper." And in fact, a truly prophetic statement. Their troops were inundated, not only from Union troops coming over the earthworks, directly in front, Union attackers from Birney's division, but Barlow's men insinuating their way up the trench, firing down the trench, firing from traverse to traverse. And Barlow's men getting into the woods behind us. Monahan's Louisianans disintegrate. And then the fight centers on this hilltop. On this hill was the Stonewall Brigade. Virginians who in 1861 stood on Henry House Hill with Thomas Jonathan Jackson. And while Stonewall Jackson gained his nom de guerre, Jackson always professed that it was the troops who had earned the name. Those troops were led here by a brigadier general named James A. Walker. Walker and Jackson had known each other prior to the war. They had a history with each other. Walker tried to kill Jackson. He had been a cadet that was relieved from the Virginia Military Institute because of Professor Jackson. He had challenged Jackson to a duel to which the professor had declined, since they were not of comparable rank. As Walker would have no rank, that just rubbed salt into the wounds. The superintendent of VMI had to send a telegram to Walker's father in Stanton, Virginia, to come take his son away before the law would take his son away. In 1861, Walker joined up as a private. Mrs. Jackson was alarmed. She begged her husband to send him elsewhere, to dismiss him, to put him in someone else's command. And Jackson, rather naively, or perhaps with deep insight, said there was nothing to worry about, that Walker was a good man, and that they were there for a good cause. In a very short time, Jackson took Walker under his wing and gave him rank and elevated him to the point where he was a brigadier general and he had become the commander of Jackson's prestigious command, the Stonewall Brigade. And the brigade loved Walker. They loved and esteemed him as they had Stonewall Jackson himself. And they proved it by giving him a nickname, one that is the perfect hallmark. He too was called Stonewall. Stonewall Jim Walker. Stonewall Jim Walker, his career ends on this hilltop. He, among many Confederates that morning, this hour, fell under the blazing fire of this Union attack. As he was carried off this hilltop and taken down through the woods towards a hospital, he may very well have been one of the very last men to leave this spot and get out. There are others who fell wounded here, and one member of the 4th Virginia Infantry who had suffered a slight wound, a significant wound, was capped by his captain and ordered to the rear. Moments later, the captain was chagrined to see this man return to the earthworks and resume his position. Confused, the officer asked, "Did I not send you to the rear?" To which he was answered, "There is no rear." This spot became surrounded. The Stonewall Brigade was able to hold Union soldiers in front of us at bay for a period of time. But there is nothing about these trenches that protect them from fire in the rear. Lieutenant J.S. Dole, 33rd Virginia. The scene here was terrible. The figures of the men seemed dimly, through the smoke and the fog, seemed almost gigantic, whilst the woods were lighted with the flashing of guns and the sparkling of musketry. James McCown, 4th Virginia Infantry. We fought desperately, not dreaming of capture, until we were completely surrounded by the overwhelming numbers. And as this brigade, like all the others below us, became surrounded, inundated, overwhelmed, they ceased to exist. Edward Johnson's division of 4,000 men has in the last hour disappeared, vanished off the battlefield, vanished off the map, and along with them, the entire center of the Confederate line has vanished. This overarching mule shoe, this salient, has been breached, and the center of the line no longer exists. As one Confederate said, the keystone in our entire arch has been taken away. And as Union soldiers flood across the field, wash over top of the earthworks like a resistless tidal wave, Robert E. Lee is to the rear, trying to make sense out of what is happening in the fog. One of Ed Johnson's staff officers, a major named Robert Hunter, has somehow managed to escape the melee on this hilltop and grab one of the captured Confederate artillery horses. As he dashed to the rear, he saw Robert E. Lee trying to rally the men in the field just beyond these woods in the McCool Farm. And it was obvious to Hunter that Lee didn't know what was going on. And as he rode up to him, he shouted, "General, the entire line is breached." And at that moment, Hunter said, Lee's countenance changed. In that moment, Robert Edward Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia were facing the gravest crisis of their entire existence. The Confederate right wing is no longer physically connected to the Confederate left wing. And there are Union soldiers pouring into a deep wedge between them. If Robert E. Lee did not do something drastic in the immediacy of this moment, all would be lost. Union soldiers sensed it as much as Lee himself. As one Union officer led his men over these earthworks, he encouraged his men by saying, "Wide awake, boys! The last day of the rebellion is at hand." And Robert E. Lee feared that that might be true. What Lee does in the next hour will determine whether this is the last day of the rebellion, the last day of the Army of Northern Virginia, the last day of the Civil War in Virginia. This is just the beginning. This touches off a firestorm that will consume these woods and this hilltop and a little bend in the earthworks, which is soon to become the bloody angle, the eye of the storm, a hurricane that sweeps everything and everybody around us. And as Michigan officer Rufus Dawes said, this would be the most terrible 24 hours of the Civil War, an ongoing saga that consumed everything over the next 22 hours on this heartbreaking landscape. We remember this today. You have come out before dawn to walk in their footsteps. I imagine that most of you will stay with us, flag retiring. All